bruises along the way, but that might provide me with more of a sense of strength or more of a sense of growth or perspective that I wouldn't gain if everything went exactly the way that I thought it should.
Hello and welcome to the Resiliency Reformation Podcast from Closer to the Whole Resiliency, where I, as your host, Christopher McKinney, along with many great guests, talk to you about living a more resilient lifestyle. If life has you down, I'm here to pick you up, and if you're already up, I'm here to hold you there. So buckle in, hang on, because life's ups and downs are here to stay, but don't worry, because so am I. We have a great show with great people, all who love helping others learn how to be more resilient. So thanks for listening, and I really hope you enjoy this episode. Today we're going to talk to a sports psychologist. We're going to dig into her mind and we're going to figure out why we think some of the things we do, how to move forward. We're going to understand that we can't have a future without accepting our past. Thank you all so much. Here we go. Hello again and welcome to Closer to the Whole Resiliency Reformation Podcast. Today we have a great guest on the show, Sarah Charles. Sarah holds a master's degree in sports psychology and for the last 7 years has dedicated herself to teaching and training athletes. She has worked with young athletes, some of which are now professional athletes. She was a former division track and field athlete at the University of Albany and consistently performed in the top 3 sports at her conference championship, breaking school records for the indoor and outdoor triple jump. She also qualified for NCAA regionals. Sarah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Sarah, now I know you don't play a lot of golf.
I don't.
But I like to start out the show the same by asking the question, when I say to you, I think it's important for one to be the golf ball and not the egg. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think when it comes in terms of resilience, that a lot of times we go through different experiences and for whatever reason, they kind of take us over. And I like to say we're a pile of glue. And so being able to bounce back requires that you kind of take what you've learned and you apply it and then you kind of move on with your life and you get closer to the next steps or the next phases that you should be going into.
Yeah, so the egg is definitely going to be that pile of goo.
Yeah.
Whereas the golf ball is definitely going to bounce forward, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so you specialize in resiliency.
Yeah.
Right? So you teach resiliency. Mm-hmm. What in particular, in regards to resiliency, do you teach? Do you focus on any certain thing? Are there areas of resiliency that you find you need to use more on a daily basis with the people you talk to? Or?
Yeah, I think what we know is like with positive psychology, because there's so many fields of psychology, is that understanding that people, we can look at what's wrong with us and we can try to fix ourselves. And some of what I teach is understanding some of the things that might hinder yourselves, whether you're thinking ineffectively or you can't control your emotions. But sometimes we talk about what's right with you and what are you using to leverage yourself to get to the next step in your life or to just grow after that setback. So a lot of times we focus on what your strengths are and how you can use that moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's very important because far too often we as humans fall into that woe is me attitude because I think for humans it's easier. It's easier to feel sorry for ourselves and it's easier to just give up, which makes teaching resiliency a very important thing, right? And so how do we break out of that? I know, partially it's just don't be lazy, but there's obviously a lot more to it to break out of that woe is me mindset and be resilient.
Yeah, I think the first step in any change that you want to make is building self-awareness, right? Being aware of what's going on for me, because I can't do something different if I am not aware that I'm doing the same thing, right? It's like, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And so being able to be aware of some of the things that I might be thinking and feeling gives me more control instead of me feeling that I affect everything, like everything's happening to me. Maybe shifting that a little bit to like things are happening for me, whether I like it or not, and be able to engage from that mindset and that standpoint.
Yeah, and so, okay, whether you like it or not, because how often do we like everything that comes our way? Right? Life is going to throw us some curveballs. Life is going to drag us down sometimes. Yep. And we have to understand, right, that resiliency, just the word alone means having the ability to bounce forward. But we have to understand that it's a lot more than just optimism. And that's one of the big things I teach is resiliency is not just being optimistic, because I think oftentimes people confuse optimism with resiliency. And while optimism ties into resiliency, there is a lot more to resiliency that really helps us deal with life struggles and setbacks, right?
Yeah, I think also there's a misconception with what optimism actually is. Because most people think optimism is just be optimistic or look on the bright side or the positive things. And let's be real. When you go through some stuff, it's not always positive. You don't feel good about it. Yeah. And so I think drawing in when we unpack optimism is that I'm also identifying where I actually have control. And sometimes I don't have the ability to affect the change that I want to make, but maybe I have control over how I'm viewing the situation. And maybe that's the only thing that I have control over. Yeah. And so I think people need to, it's called acceptance in a way. I just taught this actually yesterday. But like soldiers say, embrace the suck. I'm sure you've experienced that, And so what does that mean? Well, people say embrace it. Well, I would say that you're accepting that the reality isn't the way that you want it to. Yeah. But I would also say don't get stuck in the suck as well.
Yeah, because how often is reality the way we want it to be? I would say far too often than not, reality is 100% not the way we want it to be. Just like one of the things that I talk about is not playing out the future because we don't know the future. And we try to make the future reality. And we do that as humans all the time. I teach it and I have to stop myself and think, wait, you're playing out the future right now. Yes. Like, why don't you live in the here and the now? Yeah, the present, right? You have to live in the present before you can get to the future.
Yeah, because you can't get to the future without what you're doing right now, right? It's just kind of like this weird thing that we do with ourselves. But I know. I think that's the struggle. And I think when we look at resilience, we know that it's a process, not just an outcome. Because we're always looking at, okay, in the future, here's what I want to do. Here's where I want to be. Here's what I want my life to look like. But accepting that, that might be the ultimate goal, but along the journey, I might have some nicks and knacks and bruises along the way, but that might provide me with more of a sense of strength or more of a sense of growth or perspective that I wouldn't gain if everything went exactly the way that I thought it should.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought up goals. I'm a firm believer in goal setting. Yeah. I don't think, and this is a strong statement, but it's how I feel, I don't think you can really be resilient without having goals. Yeah. Because without goals, what is there to be resilient for, right? And so do you when you talk about resiliency to athletes, do you talk about like having goals and setting goals? And if so, how?
For sure. I feel like in so many ways when it comes to athletes, not only is goal setting important in just performance, but even injured people who, athletes who are having a trouble with refocusing because they're injured. How do I get back to my athletic experience? How do I recover from this? So goal setting is just in so many different ways. I mean, people want to try different behaviors. Like maybe they're trying to, stop smoking, or they're trying to do something different. Like even the goal setting's there. I mean, goal setting's everywhere. So I'm like, I don't know how you can get around goal setting, because at some point in your life, you're probably going to have someone that talks about goal setting.
Yeah, well, I think there's a misconception. I think there's a big difference. And a lot of people need to understand that there's wanting something in the future and then there's goal setting. Yeah. So like people may think they're setting goals by saying, I want to get promoted next year, but they're not actually sitting down and setting the goal and how to work towards and achieve that goal, right?
I think a lot of times we all like to kind of daydream and we kind of like think about thoughts that we have that might work for us in the goal setting process, but it's like in our head. So I say, take that thing that you're thinking about out of your head onto paper, right? And in the words of Lou Holtz, he says, ink it, don't think it. Right. You got to write it down, make the plan, make it, plain so that you can see what those steps look like. And if you have things that happen to you, it's not a big shock when it does happen. You're able to still reroute the process.
Yeah, and I know you're familiar with Dr. Martin Seligman.
Yeah.
I think it was him. I'm not 100% sure. But I was reading an article, and I'm 90% sure it was by him, where when you write your goals down, you are 30% more likely to achieve. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
And I think that's very powerful. Like that 30% is a very large amount.
Yeah.
So when you write your goals down, you're 30% more likely to achieve. And then when you put your goals somewhere where you can see it every day, you're another 10% more likely to achieve that goal. So just by writing your goal down and then looking at it every day, you're almost up to 50% more likely to achieve that goal, right?
Yeah. And I think like we underestimate the power of our brains and how we're human. And that I always say with goal setting, sometimes you got to trick yourself into the goal. Like sometimes you really, like you said, not only write it down, but now, for me, I actually have a whiteboard in my apartment that is right next to my TV. So I see my goals when I'm watching TV, and it's a constant reminder of the things I need to do, because I, like everyone else, can get caught up in just either being complacent or just being distracted.
So are you familiar with the power of self-persuasion?
Yeah, I think I've heard a lot. I think you told me a little bit about it. Tell me more.
Well, I love the power of self-persuasion. I'm a firm believer in it, right? And goal setting, writing your goal down and seeing it every day and thinking about it every night before you go to bed.
Yeah.
That power of self-persuasion, constantly telling yourself, and it works with anything. If you want to quit smoking, right? If you constantly tell yourself, this stinks, I'm sick of this, I'm tired of it, I'm already quit. Like I know physically I might be having a cigarette right now, but I'm done. I'm quit. And you just continue to tell yourself, I quit. And you continue to remind yourself how much you stink to everyone else, right? And how much you're hurting your health and your pocket. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, self-talk, we call it in sports psychology, self-talk. What you say to yourself matters. And so oftentimes we talk to ourselves a lot throughout our day, whether you're aware of it or not. And a lot of times we're self-deprecating. We're saying things that are not, in the best light of ourselves. So part of that process is like, I can get myself, I always say you have to be your biggest champion. At the end of the day, only you can give yourself that confidence, that booster that you need. And it has to be a habit. Yeah. Because if it's not a habit, then today you feel good, so you think better. But how consistent is it when maybe you don't feel good?
Yeah, I know. And that's where the big setbacks come into play.
Yeah, we can get into it. So, yeah.
And so I want to talk about what you said earlier when you were talking about when you speak to athletes, right? Yeah. I know you don't talk to a lot of golfers. No. But I want to describe something for you. It's called the yips. Have you ever heard of the yips?
It sounds like something that I've heard of before.
Okay, so they say you can't have the yips without a golf ball, right? The yips are when you go to play golf and you buy a bucket of golf balls before you go and actually play, and you hit that bucket and you hit every ball absolutely perfect. Yeah. And then you go to play golf, you get on the tee box, and your very first shot is shot far off into the woods or over in the road. Now a car window's busted. Who knows where that ball's going, right? It's called the yips. Yeah. So how do you teach, getting out of that habit? Like, how do you teach breaking the yips?
Breaking the yips, yeah.
It's a big thing in golf, trust me.
I'm sure.
Yeah, nobody likes that word.
Yeah, I think, it sounds not like a good word. I don't like it,
The yips.
Who wants that? But, what's the antidote for the yips? But I think that it comes down to, like, understanding when are those, we call it indicators. Like, what are the indicators that my mind is telling me something that I don't like, right? Like when you're, about to tee, is that what you call it?
Tee off.
Okay, tee off. There you go. Maybe you start to have those reservations, those thoughts that are not productive. Maybe the crowd is watching you, or there's pressure, or the sun is in your eyes. I don't know. I'm just thinking about the environment. Yeah. And so now I'm focused on these external things, and they're starting to get in my head. And then that builds that anxiety in me, right? And then now I kind of like try, I don't know what it looks like, but now I'm like trying harder instead of allowing myself to truly be where I should be, which is focus on that technique or focus on the positioning or whatever you're supposed to be doing. And so a lot of times we're just so focused on the things that are external than focusing on like what we should. And then the other thing I would add to it is like there's a difference between when we're trying to get ourselves to be at our best when we're in practice, right? A lot of times we're analyzing, we're trying to figure out what's the right thing to do and all that. When we get to performance, we need to shift our mindset to trusting ourselves. Because I always tell people, like, how much time do you spend training? And most people will say, well, 90% of my time I spend actually training the technical, the tactical, or the training parts of the practice. So by the time you get to performance, it makes sense that your mind is still analyzing, trying to correct, worry, fear, doubt. But when I get to that performance, I need to somehow shift my mindset into allowing the performance to happen instead of trying to force it to happen.
That is powerful.
Yeah.
So that really falls into trusting yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that is very powerful.
Yeah.
I'm taking it. I'm going to use that.
You should try it. No, just kidding. But,
yeah, because there is a big difference between when you're on the driving range and when you're on the tee box. And then you said something, we were talking before, and you were talking about a percentage. You were like, well, you was like, well, what are the things that generally you or other golfers think about? And I'm like, well, when you're on the driving range, I'm not thinking about anything other than, hitting the ball correctly or, where I need to be in my backswing.
Yep.
But then when I get to the tee box, maybe I'm focused on the people watching me now, or, well, now there's a score involved, right?
Yeah.
And you were saying how, well, there goes 10% of your perfect swing right there. Can you elaborate for me?
Yeah, so that 90% of our time where we are, so like you said, you're on the driving range, right? And you're just, normally, you're just thinking about hitting the ball, right?
Yeah.
Which is simple, but we're not simple people. So we tend to overcomplicate something that we already know how to do.
Yeah.
So we let all those other factors kind of get into our mind. And now we're focusing on trying to work this out instead of allowing ourselves to truly just hit the ball. All you need to do is hit the ball.
That's all I got to do.
I've worked with people who literally were like, all I need to do is this, shoot, or do push-ups, or, sprint. Like, it's so simple, but we get in our heads and it's like, wasn't it so simple when we were younger? When we were carefree and we didn't really think about all these things? Let's go back to that. But yeah, it takes time.
It does take time, and it takes practice, like you said, because you can't get to the subconscious or the trust part that your body knows what it's doing without the practice beforehand. And I think, to throw a plug in here, the same thing applies to resiliency. Resiliency really takes practice.
It does.
You can't just and when I teach resiliency, one thing that I really make sure to say at least 3 or 4 times throughout the course, I know you may feel resilient, you may feel motivated right now, but where resiliency comes into play is a week from now, a month from now, 2 months from now, and it starts tailoring off.
Yeah.
Everybody gets motivated for that first week. Everybody gets motivated for maybe even up to the first month. And then the trick is like maintaining that practice. And I think that's where a lot of people start to fall off, because it takes work to maintain resiliency.
Yes.
Both mentally and physically. It takes a lot of work. And I hate to be blunt, but it takes you not being lazy, right?
Yeah, and I think a part of that is going back to the acceptance piece, that isn't the things that happen to us are not always going to be the things that we want to happen to us. So we're going to have to be okay with, not feeling good all the time, or we got to put more effort in. Sometimes I'm going to have to push myself. So talk about motivation and goal setting. You're going to have lulls in that process, but you're going to have to have moments where you kind of like pick yourself up and like be your biggest cheerleader, or have that support system. And then even ebbs and flows of where like maybe you're going, and you got to take a knee and you got to take a tactical pause, right? Because it's not a sprint. It's truly an endurance race. So I think the more that we can be aware of these things and how we're feeling or what's going on for us, the more that we can sustain kind of the things that we're wanting for ourselves.
I love that you brought that up, because when I first started this, right? Like you've been here for the whole process. I told you when I first started going to these colleges, I will tell you, I emailed 100 colleges and I started this podcast, and for about 6 months there, I had college after college. I had this podcast. I was just starting it. So I was like doing, constant work on the podcast, constant emailing, constant networking, constant going to colleges. And I didn't even realize I was getting, not to mention I'm an instructor for the Army. I have a full-time job, and I'm a full-time dad, and I'm a full-time husband. It was nonstop. And it was like literally last month, like all of it kind of started dwindling. And when I did my last 2 appearances at colleges, I realized like, wow, like I couldn't keep this up.
Yeah.
And it felt so good. So I stopped emailing. I stopped the networking for a little while.
Yeah.
I'm still doing my podcast, obviously, but the good news is I got the legwork out of the way, starting it, and at least I have the intro and all that down. But without a break, I think I would have just fell apart, right? Breaks are very important.
Oh, yeah. We need to recover and find ways to rejuvenate, find ways to kind of reflect, because we often don't do it. And also, how are you reevaluating yourself? Because even with self-awareness, it's a process that we want to reevaluate what's going on now. Yeah. Where are we in relation to our goal? Or maybe we're not going to, succeed. And we're going to have to somehow, maybe reassess, and, then re-engage. So I think it also allows us to do a little bit of maybe soul searching that we can figure out what is the next thing that's going to be the way that I want to live, or the way that I want to view the life that I want for myself.
Yeah. And a lot of times people get fresh ideas, right? Mm-hmm. And they get burnt out quickly, and then they just give up. Yeah. So like me, I got burnt out. It was 6 months of nonstop. Yeah. And then when it finally slowed down, and I think this is really important for people to realize, when it finally slowed down, I didn't think, oh, well, nobody's getting back to me right now at this exact moment. I didn't think, oh, I need to keep go. I thought, listen, I need a break. Yep. Colleges aren't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. The podcast community isn't going anywhere. This doesn't mean I'm not succeeding. Yeah. Like I had very good workshops, right? I'm still succeeding. Yeah. I just need to take a break, right?
And also, you can't give what you don't have. Is one thing that I always tell people, right? Like, how can I pour something into another cup if I don't have it? Yeah. So as an instructor, as a father, as a spouse, like, these are things that you have to also be aware of, because you have to continue to give in every aspect of your life. Yeah. And so it's okay. It's okay.
Well, and it was too. It was taking a lot of time for my family. Yeah. And, the family should be most important. Mm-hmm. And it kind of started wearing on my wife, because she had to watch my son a lot more. And it did for a little bit there get tense and kind of frustrated. And I was so happy, instead of, getting burnt out and then stopping. I was like, okay, I'm getting burnt out. I'm going to stop. This doesn't mean I'm not succeeding. Yeah. I'm going to be resilient. Yeah. I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to continue on. And so one of the classes, or one of the groups of individuals that I talked to was the University of Alabama women's wheelchair basketball team. And one thing I want to talk about with you in terms of resiliency is, it's funny, of all the people that I've talked to, the most positive people have been these, the disabled women in wheelchairs, and they have every right to want to woe is me and this and that. But it's funny, we do an exercise. We say, write down all the negative words you can. The exercise. And then we say, write down all the positives. Yeah. The only time any group of individuals wrote down more positives than negatives was the women's wheelchair basketball team, right? Yeah. And so when you teach, when you're talking to athletes who maybe have became disabled, or if you're talking to athletes who have gotten injured, do you kind of see the same thing? Do you see the positivity, or do you see, I see that smile, so I'm guessing not.
I think it's different when you talk about like a temporary injury versus more of a permanent injury. Yeah. Because I find that people who are, it's their first injury, or maybe they had some injuries in the past, it's harder because they just want to get back to sport, right? Like this is their life, and so in their mind is like, oh, now I'm out, I'm isolated, I feel depressed, maybe they go through some of those emotions. But when it comes to someone who is like, this is their life now, like maybe I don't have any limbs anymore, or I don't have eyesight, like, so we would say that these individuals have some sort of ability to accept that this is the way that their life is going to be. However, we say don't get stuck in the suck. Yeah. They don't allow that to be who they want to be. So they accepted it, but they're still like, I am going to continue to participate in sport. I am going to strive for excellence. It does not stop the process. I might have to reroute a little bit, but it doesn't stop the goals that I want to achieve for myself. And I think you find that people who go through some of the most traumatic experiences find the most strength and they continue on because they have more of a purpose behind it. And it's also to let other people like us who are like, I don't feel like going to the gym today. And these people are amazing. You're like, what am I doing? Like, what? So I think to me, sometimes when you're, not everyone, but when you're forced to, you kind of create the path of, well, this is what I'm going to do, but this is how I want to show my story. My show doesn't have to be something as like, woe is me. It can be more of a strength of what resilience can be like.
And so I'd like to shift topic and talk about the negativity bias.
Okay.
Right? Because I felt like we were leading into that and then you went somewhere else with it, but it reminded me of the negativity bias. And I think that's something that's very important to talk about. We've talked about it before. Can you explain, what is the negativity bias? Where does it come from? Why do we as humans have it?
Yeah, I think we are hardwired to notice and look for the negative things in our environment because as human beings, we want to survive and we want to self-preserve. And so if we were back in the day wandering off in the woods and there was a bear, well, that bear is a threat, right? Threat to my life. And so because of that, I want to protect myself and make sure, that bear was over there. Remember that. Don't go in that area, right? And then if the bear does come, your body's naturally going to respond to it. So when it comes to our modern day society, the bear, quote unquote, is not necessarily the physical creature that might eat us, but the bear becomes bills. The bear becomes self-comparison. The bear becomes, what other people are saying about me or politics. It could be anything. And so we are just inundated. We have so much media. We have so much connection, not really truly connected, but we're connecting. And I think a lot of times we want to be better than the next person because they're going on vacations or they're getting their goals faster, and I should be where I am. I should be, further along, and I'm not. And so a lot of times that negativity bias is so real because we're expecting so much more of ourselves, and we're less grateful for the simple things that we have. We kind of want more and more and more, and I think that's where we focus in on a lot.
I love that. We're less grateful for the simple things that we have, right? And I think maybe that's why, I remember why I thought about the negativity bias now, because the positive and negative word exercise. As you well know, there are more negative words in the dictionary than there are positive. And when I talk to the women's wheelchair basketball team, I think that speaks for itself as, they're grateful for what they have. And I think it's a bad thing that we as humans can't all feel that way without some sort of traumatic event. Right? We should all feel that way without some sort of traumatic event, but we take a lot of things for granted. Right? And so I think it's important to find the positives in life.
For sure.
Me and my wife and my son, this is corny, I know. But generally speaking, now every night before we go to bed, we all talk about one thing that we're thankful for that day. Do you think that's important? Is like something as simple as finding the positives? Do you think that can help with resiliency?
For sure. I think gratitude and having that attitude of gratitude. You hear people write in journals. Something that I do is I have a jar, and it's called my gratitude jar. And I write anything that happens that's good. I'll put it on a little Post-it note. I'll put it in the jar. And then I keep the jar for a year, pretty much, of all the good stuff and reflect on it. Sometimes when I just need it, I need to
really.
You know how we're like, there's nothing good going on.
I'm taking from you. I'm taking that from you as well. I love that.
Yeah. And it's just you need it, you reflect on it, or I just wait after the whole year and I think back and I can reflect back on the year. So
Wow, I love that. The
But,
gratitude jar. I'm taking that from you. So for everybody that's listening, we have to be resilient because we have automatic lights in here and they just shut off. So if you hear a loud bang, that's just me throwing something at the sensor and it missed, but that's okay. We'll be all right. We got the windows open. It's light enough.
For the lights.
The light from the laptop here. But we're getting close to wrapping it up. To wrapping it up anyways. I just wanted to talk about one more thing.
Sure.
And there's not really a name for it, or there is maybe, but it's thoughts that we all have that we unknowingly fall into, right? And I think once we realize we have these thoughts, it can help us to break out of these thinking traps, right? So I have individuals in my life who thinks everything is everyone else's fault, right? I have individuals in my life who thinks everything is their own fault, right? I have individuals in my life who swear up and down they know what I'm thinking and that I should know what they're thinking at any given point in time, right? And all these are traps that we can fall into kind of mentally. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about at all?
Yeah, I am familiar with it. I think there's a process that we often have that we're probably not aware of. And it's kind of like mistakes that our brain sometimes makes because we don't always have all the information. Like if you're walking down an alley and all of a sudden it seems dark, everything looks like a scary movie. So automatically you're waiting for the guy to come out and just hit you or do something to you. But then maybe nothing happens. But because we're humans, we collect a lot of different, call it schemas, if you will. And so we're constantly...
straight out of Made to Stick, by the way. It's a great book. You all should read it, but continue.
So we pretty much want to fill in the blanks. Our brain likes to do that. We just work like that. But when we often do that, sometimes and most times, we're not always accurate. So we think it's other people's fault because we don't really see what other things were contributing, or maybe that I didn't do something that enabled that to happen. But then once we have it set, it's hard to change our thoughts.
It is.
So it becomes that pattern in the way that we think, and it kind of shapes the way we operate, honestly, and the way we kind of behave and the way that we maybe see the world because we're so caught up in what we believe is happening. So I think it goes back to what we talked about is taking that time to slow down a little bit and really think and collect yourself and ask yourself a question is like, what am I doing that I'm not doing or that I should be doing? Right? And just being able to think more critically. And then it helps you to seek for a little bit more thoroughness. Maybe figure out there's things that I don't know. Like your spouse, let's say, she cooks you steak on Wednesdays and you're ready for her to cook you steaks on Wednesday. And today she didn't. Maybe something happened, but we're like, I like my steak. So what are you doing? Right? Like, so just having the opportunity, like, well, maybe something happened and she couldn't. And so ask the question.
Instead of automatically assuming she knows this is what I want, exactly. Or if you're not getting that promotion at work and you think, oh, this is because of them, this is because of them, this is their fault, this is their fault, sitting back, maybe even writing down a couple things that could have possibly been your fault. Like sitting back, reflecting. Do you meditate at all?
No, I don't meditate. I would say pray. I pray. I have,
pray?
Prayer time.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So using prayer, meditation, but just sitting back and reflecting and understanding these traps that we can fall into, mentally and trying to break our way out of them. Yeah. And a big problem is people that don't listen to these type of podcasts, people that don't seek this type of information will never fall out of these traps because they don't know that they exist.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the hard part about it.
Yeah.
When you're not self-aware, it's really hard for you to be aware of what's going on for you. So it's like you kind of stay in that same bubble, if you will.
Tiny little bubble. You're just gonna stay in it your whole life.
Yeah. Unless something happens that you break out of it.
Exactly.
That you weren't prepared for.
So we're gonna wrap up with one more question.
Okay.
Right? You're familiar with mulligans. Do you remember what mulligans are?
Remind me again.
So if you're playing golf and you hit a bad shot and you don't like where the ball went, you just kind of pick it up and put it in your pocket. It never happened. Yeah. Or if you're on the tee box and you hit a bad shot, you just kind of say, take a mulligan, and you'll put another ball down and then hit another shot. Okay. Right? So the question is, if life were a game of 18 holes, because golf is a game of 18 holes. So if life were a game of 18 holes, what hole would you be on right now? And how many mulligans would you have taken to get there?
Okay, so I think I would be on the 9th hole.
The 9th hole, right in the middle? Okay.
Yeah. And then I would probably say I would not do any mulligans.
No mulligans.
No. Because I think part of life is what has made you where you're at. Perfect. If I'm at the 9th hole, then I'm there for a reason. Yeah. And those experiences shaped me to the point that I'm excited for the next chapters. or holes, if you call it.
Yeah.
But just being okay with the journey and accepting the process that you're at, I think that empowers you instead of, we talked about being the ball and not being the egg. Instead of being a pile of goo and wishing things were the way they, aren't, being able to accept that and embrace where you're at only makes you stronger and just a more effective leader, person, father, whatever you are. I think people respect that more.
Yeah, because if you can't accept the past, you can't move forward.
Exactly.
It's something that people hear all the time, but I don't think ever actually really sit down and think about what that means.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to be resilient if you can't look back on your past and say, that is something that led me to where I am now.
Yeah.
Right? Without that, maybe it was a tiny life lesson. Maybe I learned something small that I don't even know what it was yet, or maybe it was a big life lesson.
Yeah.
But either way, I love the no mulligans.
Yeah.
And because if you look back and regret your life, you can't move forward in life.
No, not at all.
So, Sarah, I really appreciate you being on my show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It was a blast. And I'm going to ask you now, because you can't refuse. Would you come back on?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
I would love to come back
You
again.
have to say yes because the microphone's here. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of pressure to come back. But no, I would love to join you again.
All right, Sarah. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. Hey, listen, if you want to contact me, do so at closertothehole18@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, Closer to the Hole. You can find me on Instagram, Closer to the Hole. You can go to my website, www.closertothehole.com. Everything Closer to the Hole. Thank you all so much for being here, and I hope you all have a great day.